as a 40-year-old, I'm like, this is not what I thought 40 looked like.
Really?
And that to me is very exciting. I'm like a fucking tree. You know, like I've been here. I think being queer is like such a gift. I think it's so wonderful. I wouldn't change it for the world. But I think when you grow up being told who you are, and not only did they tell me who I was, they told me who I was through the language of hate. So much of my 20s was about undoing the internalized homophobia. And I also think we live in a culture that's very much about being hopeful and wanting to make each other feel better.
Totally.
But I think one of the best things we can do is actually allow each other to be disappointed, you know, to be like, yeah, that sucks.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective podcast. I'm your host, Carbon.
And I'm Emily.
And I'm Vivek.
Yay!
And welcome to the show.
Hi.
So today we are so excited to welcome Vivek Shraya. Vivek is a Toronto-based artist whose body of work crosses the boundaries of music, literature, visual art, theater, TV, and film. You do so much, and it's been such a pleasure to look through your whole body of work. She is a Canadian Screen Award winner and Polaris Music Prize nominee. And her best-selling book, I'm Afraid of Men, was heralded by Vanity Fair as cultural rocket fuel. So nice. What a compliment. She is also the founder of the award-winning publishing imprint VS Books, which supports emerging BIPOC writers. In today's episode, we're going to explore topics of toxic relationships, male fragility in the post-Me Too era, and aging and mourning a dream. Vivek explores so many of these topics in her newly released album, Baby You're Projecting, which you can look at right here.
Plug.
So I recommend you check that out after listening to this. So like I said in the intro, your work is so intentionally queer, and that's something I really loved and really felt like surrounded by that energy at your show. It was really special.
Cool.
And I was wondering if you'd be able to start this conversation off by really explaining some of your inspirations and why it feels important to you to take this very like queer approach with the work that you're creating.
It's really interesting because that's not how it started for me. I really struggled actually with being queer. It was something that felt very, very hard, especially because of the homophobia that I experienced growing up in Edmonton. You know, I had friends who, when they came out as gay, they were like, I'm gay, I love it. But I was not that person. I like, if I could have just like cut off my right arm to be quote unquote normal, I would have. So it took me a really like long time to sort of like undo the sort of internalized homophobia. And then I actually made a project called What I Love About Being Queer about 10 years ago. And it was around the time that I started to meet other queer people in Toronto, especially older queer people who'd been around, who talked about the history of activism in the city and beyond. You know, whenever people ask me, like, how do you love yourself? How do you embrace yourself? Like, my answer is always like, for me, it's been meeting other queer people and other trans people, other gender nonconforming people. You know, there's this saying, you can't love anyone until you love yourself. And I actually think the
At RuPaul.
Yeah. I don't know that RuPaul coined that,
Okay.
but yes, but for me, it's the opposite. I actually really think that it's been through other people and loving other people that I've been able to love myself. I would say in the last 10 years, I started talking more about being queer in my art, and I felt very motivated to try to create the kinds of things I didn't have growing up and the kinds of resources and art and representation that would have made a difference to a brown queer kid in Edmonton. And so that's been a driving force for me, and it continues to sort of propel me forward, and it, you know, it's sort of a constant inspiration. I think right now, especially, I was saying this at the show, I really struggle with visibility politics and like how much does visibility matter really, and is it really changing things for people? And I find lately with everything that's going on in the world, it feels like being hyper gay is like the best thing we all can do. You know, and so like, again, I think that's something that's really inspiring me right now, is thinking about how to ramp up the queerness and everything.
I love hearing that because we've recently done an episode where we talked about kind of that spectrum.
Gay audacity.
The spectrum of internalized homophobia to gay audacity.
Okay.
And really, after doing a lot of interviews this year of different queer people, we've noticed that it is a spectrum and you can move along it. Some people are just naturally at this level of gay audacity where you're constantly just like fully yourself and there's no other option. And then so many people are at this internalized homophobia piece, but you're someone I would have clocked as like an immediately
no, and I mean,
person.
I think being queer is like such a gift. I think it's so wonderful. I wouldn't change it for the world, but I think when you grow up being told who you are, like my experience of queerness wasn't I got the privilege of coming out because I was a femme kid. People told me who I was. And not only did they tell me who I was, they told me who I was through the language of hate. So it wasn't like, hey, did you know you're gay? Being gay is awesome. They were like, fucking fag.
Yeah.
And so when you learn who you are through hate, it's really hard, especially when you learn that at like 12, 13, 14. It's really hard to be like, I love this part of myself. I love this thing, especially because I didn't know what a fag was. I didn't know what being gay was. And then when you find out that this is who you are and everybody around you has known this thing about you that you didn't even know about yourself, and that it's so abnormal and vile and gross, it's hard to be gay audacious. Like it just is. So like for me, I that's one of the things I think a lot about. I know we're going to talk about aging and mourning soon. Yeah. This is a very positive conversation already. But
I'm excited to have it all. Yeah.
But like, I think for me, there's a lot of mourning around like my youth because I don't feel like I got to have a lot of like even my 20s. I feel like so much of my 20s was about undoing the internalized homophobia as opposed to, backpacking with my friends and going partying every night. Like I didn't have that experience because so much of the work I was doing was trying to find love for myself,
Well, with all of the homophobia, harassment, abuse that one can experience as a young kid, it would be easier and probably safer to internalize everything and just have a lot of internalized homophobia. So I would say that you do have a lot of gay audacity because you had the bravery to even get there in the first place, which unfortunately some people don't. They just suppress it.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to use the word audacity, like my queer audacity is that I continue to live. Yeah. The fact that I persevered through hatred, that I'm still here, that I'm making art. We talk about homophobia as though it's like a childhood thing, but actually it is around us at all times. There's not a time that homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, racism don't exist. And the fact that I continue to push forward, like this is gay audacity.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say too, is we feel it at the same time, like making this kind of content online. And I can surely assume it feels that much greater for you as well, putting yourself on all of these different platforms. It's like you get so much online hate, and for a second we felt ourselves internalizing it. I really appreciate people who are so out and visible about themselves and make art that is so visible for other people to have something to hold on to, because you're taking a lot of the heat, for lack of a better word.
You're putting yourself on blast for the sake of other people as well.
Totally.
Yeah. But it's definitely something that we admire you for.
Thank you. That's really nice.
Your album, Baby You're Projecting, explores a lot of themes of toxic romantic relationships and male fragility. Vivek does have a very scandalous wedding happening in their music videos for this album, so you should go check it out. But I'm wondering if you could share how your personal experiences informed the creation of the album.
I mean, I was going through a breakup, and it wasn't a traditional breakup. So because I think breakups, we think of them as like romantic, but we have friend breakups, there's familial breakups, there's breakups in all kinds of circumstances. And this was not a traditional one. And so it was really hard in some ways, because I think if you are going through a romantic breakup and you're like, my boyfriend dumped me or whatever, people are very sympathetic, they understand. But when you're going through a breakup with, your religion or, with a friend, it's harder to get that kind of support. So I felt very alone in that process and was completely devastated. And because of that experience, I started just thinking about relationships I've had with men in general and breakups I've gone through with men in general. And so I've called the album a breakups album. And basically, it really allowed me to here's this theme again of mourning, but it really allowed me to mourn. Like, I think that for me, the beautiful thing about art is it allows you to put your feelings somewhere. And in the absence of being able to really talk about what I was going through, I made this. And then, while I was making this, I've been thinking a lot about what it means to make art now in my 40s as someone who's like, mid-career, whatever that means. And like, I've been around for so long. And I think the nice thing about making art now is that I get to kind of do whatever I want. Like the stakes are very different. I think when I was pursuing pop stardom, it was like, you have to appeal to a label, you have to appeal, you have to write a hit song, all of that stuff. And like, I don't really have that pressure now. It's sort of like I get to do whatever inspires me. And so I've always wanted to make a long form music video. I love the way that, music videos in the 90s told a story. The narrative in the video isn't something that's actually happened to me. It is very fictional. So it was fun to create. I mean, I hope that listeners will go through the whole journey, because for me, I do think there's like a narrative arc for the album. But I also feel like if you have a short attention span and if you only like a specific kind of genre of music, I think that there's something for everyone on it. So I hope that people listen to that and think about their own relationships to breakups, I guess.
Yeah. Turn your shuffle off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Coming back to toxic relationships, we're wondering what your experience with them have maybe taught you in terms of identifying them and then taking the step further to exiting that relationship for the betterment of yourself and perhaps even the other person.
In the moment, you don't always know that it's toxic. And again, this is, I think, where art is really useful, because like you write about the moment that you're in. And now in retrospect, I'm like, I've had a lot of relationships change in the past 3 years. And there's some where I'm like, I should have maybe exited that relationship or changed that relationship like years ago. But it's hard because you don't always know in the moment. So I think part of it is like having the experience and then knowing for next time.
Before meeting Emily, actually, like that, I was in a variety of toxic relationships. And I think I had this moment where I identified what was also happening within me that was attracting it and then feeding into it. Was there a moment for you also where you identified, this is what I'm doing to attract it?
I think I had like 2 epiphanies with like quote unquote toxic relationships in my life. And one was like late teens, early 20s. I realized I was really drawn to like non-available people. Classic. I really liked the chase. I loved people in relationships because then,
So bad.
Oh, so bad. Homewrecker. I loved the challenge. Like, I'm like, could they break up with their partner to be with me? And then when they did, I was like,
I think I'm done.
Well,
My work here is done.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on to the next. And then, but it also like allowed me to feel really bad about myself, because I was like, of course they wouldn't break up with their partner for me. Of course they're not into me. I'm hideous. So that was, I think, a big shift, was like, okay, let's stop doing that. And then I think in my 30s, I realized that a lot of my friendships, I had inadvertently befriended people who had patterns similar to my mother. My mom is someone who is very generous, who gives a lot, but she has difficulty receiving. Like, I've bought her presents and she'll return them, and then she'll buy me the same present and give to me. Like, it's very weird. It's very strange. Like, I've bought her flowers and I'll buy her the cheapest flowers possible because I'm like, I know she can't receive and she won't even touch them. Like, she won't take them. And I actually think that's actually one of the hardest things about being a human. I think a lot of us are givers. We don't know how to receive love. And the best example I have for that is like compliments. How many times do you compliment someone where you're like, I really like your hair? And they're like, I really like your hair.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like this dodgeball thing that happens, right? Whereas like, I love a compliment. Someone's like, I like your hair. I'm like, thank you. Like, I know I actually don't have that problem, but my mom, I really see this in her. And I ended up in my 30s realizing that a lot of my friendships were people who also didn't know how to receive love. And so what that allowed me to do was constantly replay this pattern of trying to prove myself, trying to have love be received, because it was playing out with my mom, but then you repeat that with your friends. And it was really useful to name it, because then when my friends started acting that way, or once I'd named it and I started seeing that behavior in my friends, I could be like, this reminds me of a pattern I have with my mom where she doesn't receive. And nobody wants to hear that they're like your mom. Yeah. Like, nobody. And so it was actually really useful, because I think it really changed things in my friendships as well. So those were like 2 big patterns that like I was able to sort of like break out of. And that was really, really useful. But I think the hardest thing is like, a lot of us can be self-aware about our patterns, but I think very few of us are interested in walking away from those patterns. I think like it's one thing to observe the pattern and be like, this is a common theme for me, but a lot of us are very attached to replaying those things over and over again, right? So
It's hard getting past step one.
It is. Like, just because you're self-aware, that's actually not enough to break the pattern. Breaking the pattern means making a different choice. When the pattern emerges again, to be like, I'm not going to do this again, as opposed to like, this feels familiar. Why don't I do this dance one more time? You know?
Well, how did you start to break the pattern?
I really, in my teens, in late 20s, I really wanted something different. I really wanted to know what it would be like to be loved by someone and not to chase for it, to just like have love be given. And being open to that, I did experience that, you know? And same within my 30s, like, I think for me, like, naming this pattern and telling my friends, this is an issue I have with my mom that I'm trying to work out. Please do not,
take the flowers.
Yeah, like, please, when I give you something, please receive it. I just need you to receive it.
Yeah.
And this isn't to say I don't fall into the trap of like just self-awareness and then repeating patterns, but usually self-awareness for me is a lot. Like, it really does motivate me to make a change.
Yeah. So are you single right now? Are you looking for that kind of love still?
No, I'm madly in love.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that for you.
Yeah, I'm very happy.
The pattern has been broken.
The pattern has been broken. I'm very loved and I'm very in love.
We've had the pleasure of hearing you speak in an interview to a group of artists where you mentioned that when you exist outside of the gender binary, people are confused about your gender presentation. There's this feeling that no one wants to fuck you, nobody wants to date you. This actually isn't the first time we've heard someone express this, and this is kind of why we wanted to have this conversation, because I think it's a common theme for people. And we're wondering if you could elaborate more on this experience and if you found any clarity on it throughout the years.
I think one of the things that no one prepared me for with transition was the shift in desirability. You know, before I transitioned, I identified as male, and, you know, even being brown in the queer community, like in a racist queer community, was still challenging. But like, to use socials again, like, I don't have a huge male following. Like, most of my following is like women or gender nonconforming people. And I'm bi, so that's great. But like, it's interesting, specifically male desirability, like having men desire me has really, really shifted. And it's hard sometimes because, like, especially because I feel like I was so trained to want it and also to need it, you know, like, male desirability in some ways meant safety. It meant worth and value. And so to not have it, it's felt hard at times. And like, I mean, again, I'm in a relationship with someone, so that's really nice. But part of it's like, again, intersected with aging as well. Like, I came out as trans in my late 30s, and I definitely feel like the older you are as a feminine person in the world, and I'm not even that old, but I definitely feel a shift in how people look at you. And it's nice to feel desirable. It just is. It's just a nice thing. And so sometimes I miss it, you know. I can't control it. Like, you can't make people be attracted to you or whatever. But I think one of the things I'm trying to do in my art is just like push the sexiness a little bit more, because and that's for me. Just because I don't feel desirable by men doesn't mean I can't feel desirable. And so what does it mean for me to create a sense of desirability for myself? I haven't come to like any huge like clarity or realizations, because again, it's like, it's sort of out of my control. All I can do is try to own my own, you know, own my body as much as I can, own my sense of desire for myself. And yeah. And I think kind of the interesting thing that I noticed of like going from sort of seeking predominantly male partners to seeking predominantly female partners is that women, this is such a generalization, but it was my experience, is that men, I think they're just like trained to constantly just like spit out compliments at you. And sometimes it can feel good and validating, like turning people down and that kind of thing. Totally.
But then you go into a gay bar, and women, on the other hand, and a lot of gender nonconforming people are very like reserved. And I feel like all of us are used to being on the other end of it, of like having people come to us so nobody comes to each other, you know. So you're like, oh, like it's like this level of unsureness. But
if I just look hard enough, they'll understand.
See, but I feel like with transness and trans femininity, it's almost like, I feel like it's a bit of like, not a pedestal, but it's like people are like goddess, fierce, fabulous. And I'm like, okay, like it's nice, I guess, or like queen, but it's like, to me, there's like a bit of this like, like a bit of like a worship that's happening, or like, I don't know. And I'm like, no, like, touch me. You know, like I want to feel like a central being in the world, not someone's mom. Not that there's anything wrong with being a mom, but like I feel like that's what's weird is like as soon as it's like mother, queen, goddess, it's like the sexuality's removed. And I'm like, if queen, goddess, mother had sexuality and desire attached to those things, great. But for me, the way that I experience those words often is like more kind of like pedestal thing as opposed
like a
to
separation.
Like as opposed to, you know, something like a sensual being, you know.
Yeah. I think the aging piece is really interesting as well. I think another weird thing just about men in general that has been kind of like a noticed aspect that I've kind of seen online too is that so many men are willing to hit on someone who's in their youth, which is really creepy. And then it goes away very quickly as well. But I do appreciate you creating art, being visible and being older and like creating it in a very like sexual way, because it's like you don't die after you turn 30.
Exactly. I'm
so tired of this.
No, I did this like t-shirt. I have a new t-shirt to go with the album, and like I hired a sexy model and I straddled him, and it was just like the promo photos is like very sexy, and it was like a very intentional choice because I was like, just because she's in her 40s doesn't mean she like doesn't have desire or doesn't feel desire or isn't desirable, right? So
and they're all hot and you look fantastic.
Thank you.
And
I mean, I feel that way. And it's honestly, a lot of it's for me, right? Because again, when you live in a world that looks at you a certain way, you start to feel that way about yourself. So creating the image, like when I feel bad about myself, I look at that sexy image and I'm like, well, she's in here somewhere. And that feels nice, you know?
This next kind of part of the conversation that we want to jump into is sort of based around male fragility, especially as it pertains to the Me Too movement, which is a theme that you definitely bring into this album. Kind of starting it off, though, back in 2018, you published a novel, I'm Afraid of Men. Has your view of men evolved since writing the book?
No.
Still the same.
Still afraid. Has the world changed? No. Gotten worse.
It's true. I'd also say I've been someone who's been very afraid of men, and I appreciate you weaving in the Me Too movement. It's like we've done a whole episode kind of talking about my own experiences with sexual assault, and would definitely recommend people check that out if you don't feel too triggered. But for me, it's like I didn't let any men into my life before because I felt really afraid of them. And now we have a group of friends where I'm like, okay, there's a lot of men. Some of them are even like cis and straight that I feel comfortable and good around, and I feel like I can talk to them. Is this kind of like an experience that you've had as well? Like, do you feel like you can see sort of different aspects, or do you still keep yourself at a very much an arm's distance?
I mean, the tension of I'm afraid of men is as a queer person, I'm also attracted to men. That is the tension, right? One of the things I really was frustrated about with that book was how many people would come up to me and be like, I love your book. I hate all men. And I'm like, oh, that's not the book. That's not the title. And I appreciate some people feel that way. That's not how I feel. For me, the tension is what it means to be both afraid and have desire. That like both things can be true, that you can be very attracted to men but also very afraid. Any sort of weird criticism around the book or judgment around the book based on the title, I'm like, read the book, because it is again coming from a place, I think, of empathy, especially for someone who used to identify as male, right? And who understands that experience. I don't even use the word toxic masculinity. Like in the book once, I never ever use it because for me, I always like struggle with, once we call something toxic, is there room for it to be anything else? And I think that toxic masculinity has become such a buzz phrase that I feel like it limits the possibility of what quote unquote masculinity can be potentially, right?
Moving on to this next piece, which I'm really excited about, which is to speak about aging and mourning a dream, which we've heard you speak about. In 2021, you released a book in one-person theatrical show titled How to Fail as a Pop Star, which, this is the part where I'm excited about, CBC Gem is now adapting into a comedy comedy series, which you said is coming out this fall.
Yeah.
So excited for that. That really dives into kind of this notion of like the life escalator and mourning a dream of like when you're supposed to reach the certain goal. And then it's like, oh, whoa, I passed that. Where am I now? Despite all this pressure around what level of success you should have by a certain age, what kept you pushing to continue to pursue your artistic career, especially around music?
I've been thinking a lot about this as I put out this album, but I feel like sometimes loving something is maybe a form of insanity.
Why is that?
Well, because like I can't help but do it. Like no matter how hard it is to put out, no matter, like music is not the thing that if people like my work, it's not usually the music that they know of. It's usually writing and or whatever else, which is so nice. And I'm so grateful for that. But like music's the thing I like to do the most. And so I just keep doing it. And so I think, and music, for the kinds of ambitions that I had in my 20s, which was pop stardom, like it is very much age centric. Like it's not the kind of field. Like with writing, for instance, there's a lot of people, there's that meme that's like, don't worry, Toni Morrison didn't write her first book until she was 40 or whatever. Right. But like nobody's like, don't worry, Britney Spears had her first hit when she was 40. Like that just doesn't exist. Like it is a youth-centered industry. Yeah. But even after like turning 30, I was just like, but I love doing this thing and I keep making it. So, I mean, to be honest, I'm just really driven by love. Like I love it so much. I think music is like the love of my life. And so it's complicated and we have a strange relationship, but it's such a hard thing to convey because people think that either you're being delusional or ungrateful. Yeah. And I also think we live in a culture that's very much about being hopeful and wanting to make each other feel better. Totally. But I think one of the best things we can do is actually allow ourselves to allow each other to be disappointed, to be like, yeah, that sucks. Yeah.
No, I have experienced a similar feeling. For a very long time, I had this dream of being like a famous, quote unquote famous as you can get, of a dancer.
Cool. And dance is very youth centric.
Very youth centric. So I understand the youth centric sort of disappointment or mourning. I did go professional for a few years. And I did have this mourning period of like, what is dance to me? Mm-hmm. Why did I want to be professional in the first place? Mm-hmm. Am I okay with not being professional?
And
am I? Well,
I think you're still grappling with it too.
I'm still coming to terms with it, and I'm still even now continuing to try to figure out my relationship with dance. For a while, I was like, I just don't want to do anything with it at all. For a little bit, I was like, I don't think I want to dance whatsoever. I recently took a workshop with one of the OGs of street dance. Cool. And somebody asked them about like, how do you like beat people in battles, or like, how do you enter a cipher, and like, how are you so great? What he said really stuck with me because he was like, when I dance, it's not about like what people are seeing. It's not about what people are thinking of me in that moment. My dance is my relationship with God. And even if you're not particularly religious, I think that that's such a beautiful way to describe it, because it is your connection to sort of like whatever you want to call it, your higher self, to the universe, to the earth.
I love that.
Maybe that's something that some people can take away.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful.
How do you feel about this is kind of a bit morbid, the thought that maybe your work could live on though beyond you? And like you have such a huge body of work, especially even musical work. You used to be in a band with your brother. It's like you've had a long body of work just in music. Do you think it's something that people could find later on even, and like that could happen? Is that a thought in your mind ever?
I have people in my life that are like, maybe one day I'll get discovered when I die, like that kind of thing. I don't care. Really. I mean, that would be nice, I guess, but I don't know. Like, I mean, with like climate change and everything else, like it's really
like how long?
Yeah, like I just
vinyl will survive climate change.
Like I don't know. To me, there's more important things. Like I think one of the things I actually struggle with the most is like, does any of this matter? I struggle with a lot of like
100%.
like nothingness and existentialism.
Yeah.
So that's where I live. I'm not like one day my legacy. Like I mean, I do think it's interesting too, because like I do know artists in their 40s who like are like use the word of language of legacy a little bit more, and I find it creeping up a little bit, but it's less about like what am I leaving behind and more of like I've been here for 40 years. I don't know how much longer I've never felt entitled to being alive, and so I'm like, what else do I want to say before I get out of here? And so just making sure that the time I have left is doing as much as possible the things that like I want to make sure that like I've said and done while being here. So it's less about like what will my legacy be and more about like how do I make sure I use the rest of the time that I have here, however much that is, as efficiently and as creatively and as smartly and as joyfully as possible. Yeah.
So for us, kind of in what we're building, and I also feel like with you being 29 this year, and like a lot of our friends kind of approaching like 29 and 30 this year too, and that being kind of somewhere where we're living at, and it's kind of transforming what you think of a certain age, in that it's like 30 doesn't have, you not die at 30. Which I used to think at 18, I was like, I'm dead at 30. It's like everything has to happen before 30 or else it's like,
I'm not laughing because I'm with you.
Yeah. And then I was like, okay, like in my mind has been 30, and then I like wasn't even really thinking about 40. And then we've connected with you, and I also connected with the folks at Yo Homo as well, who I know are kind of like connections for you too, and they're also in their 40s. And I'm like, all of these people are so cool. They're not dead. You're still kicking. You're like, but you're still very cool is what I mean. It's like, I feel like before in our minds, I only used to see 40-year-olds as like parents.
Let me tell you the best anti-aging serum secret.
No kids.
Ooh, there it is. We call it skincare.
This is not the face of a parent. I think one of the things that has surprised me has been the positive things about aging. Like obviously there's like a lot of like, we talked about the youth centricness of pop stardom and all that stuff, but like that's how I feel. Like as a 40-year-old, I'm like, this is not what I thought 40 looked like.
Really?
And that to me is very exciting. Like even when I look at my friends too, I'm like, we even sit around and we're like, did we think this is what 40s looked like? And that to me is really nice. And I also think it's very queer, right? Like I think we get to choose the life we want in a lot of ways. I remember turning 41 and being like, oh, and then I was like, oh, there's so much life on the other side, and I'm just getting started. And and like the nice thing about 40 is like imposter syndrome, all that stuff, like it's there, but it can't hold you down the same way, because like I'm like a fucking tree. Like I've been here, like I've been here for 40 years. I've had the privilege of being here for 40 years. Like I know what I'm doing now. And it feels really good to be like, okay, now that I've been around and I've played the game, like what do I want to do with that knowledge and experience? And it's like really, really nice. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of drawbacks that we could talk about, but like, I'm actually very pleasantly surprised how enjoyable my 30s were, how much I'm enjoying my 40s. Like, and I know like even Madonna, we have like lots of complicated feelings about how she's aging, but I saw the speech, where she's like, I never thought the most controversial thing I would do was age. And I think I find it so interesting how uncomfortable she makes people just because she's like
still wearing crop tops.
And people are like, she should retire, she should make adult contemporary, blah blah blah. And I'm like, actually, I kind of just love that she's just like, I'm going to keep being Madonna in my 60s.
I love that.
So I just like, I think that role models exist. I think part of it is that we just don't get as much exposure to them. I think part of it's also just like having the confidence to carve your own path. Like for me, it's like, I've never really known what I was doing. I just was inspired by an idea. When I wrote my first book, like I didn't take a writing class. I didn't know what writing a book was. Kind of like what we were talking about making films. Like when I made my first film, like I, downloaded illegal software and I made a film. And I taught myself on Google. Yeah, exactly. That's what they say. But I was inspired. I was inspired to make something. I was so driven by the idea and realizing an idea. And I think that that's what you do as an artist, is that like, it's so interesting when people hear that I want to be a pop star, what they think is I wanted to be famous. And I never use the word famous because I actually never wanted fame. I actually just wanted to be able to have my music connect with a lot of people, which I see as different. Like for me, when I hear the word famous, I think fame for the sake of fame, just being known for the sake of known. I never wanted to be known for the sake of being known. I wanted my music to reach a lot of people. And so I think that like, again, nothing wrong with wanting what you want, but I think sometimes in the noise of socials and stuff, it's easy to forget that we are artists first, and that, you know, I think being an artist means like continually like following your muse, whatever it is, and staying the course. Because I think too, like there were so many times where I could have walked away. There were so many times where I could have been like, a lot of my friends when they turn 30, 30 is like a big one for especially musicians. It's a lot of them like pack it in, go back to law school, move home. And I was like, I'm just going to keep on going here. I don't know. Again, I don't have a lot of peers doing this. I don't know. I guess I'll write this book. And it's all just been like hit or miss, throwing things at the wall. And, you know, every so often something sticks.
On kind of that sort of like internet trend thing you're bringing up, where it's like this person didn't make it till this time, that person didn't do this until that time. Where were you at kind of in your mid to late 20s approaching 30? Like what was that headspace for you? Like where were you? Because I'm just interested.
Yeah. I mean, in my mid to late 20s, what I really grappled with was entitlement. I think that I had always believed that if you were hardworking and if you had talent, that it would all work out. That was the model that I grew up with. That was what I was told. That's what you see in Hollywood. That's what you see in the movies. Suddenly in my mid to late 20s, I was like, oh, actually, I am relatively talented. I have been showing up. I know some people, and yet none, and I'm very hardworking. And actually that doesn't mean that I will be successful. That in fact, none of us are entitled to an audience. None of us are entitled to a following. None of us are entitled to success. And that it is a form of entitlement to believe that you are. Like, that's one of the reasons why pop star to me felt like such an important story, because so many of, like, you read biopics or watch biopics and people are like, I always believed, I always knew that it would work out. And it's like, yeah, for every one person who put it on their vision board and it worked, there's like thousands of us that put it on our vision board and work hard and it doesn't work. That's just reality. And so I think the narrative of like, I always believed, believe in yourself, that's all you need. Like, I actually think it's quite damaging because it's a lie. It's just not true. And what that does is it places responsibility on the person who doesn't succeed. If you don't succeed, it's your fault because you didn't believe in yourself enough. You didn't manifest it. You were in your own way. That feeling was what made me take a little bit of a break from music. But at the same time, I was so creative. I was so interested in telling a story, and that was same creative spark that then inspired my first book, which ended up being more successful than anything I'd ever done as a musician before. So it was both of those things at once, was this feeling of like, just because I believe in something or want something or I'm talented or whatever doesn't mean it's going to work out. And that was a very new thought for me. And then also thinking about how to use my voice in other ways.
I think shifting or being flexible, some people can mistake that with giving up on your dream.
Totally.
But the interesting thing about you is that regardless of which art medium you take, you're still working towards the same goal, which is to connect to a lot of people.
Totally.
Being firm in your vision, but flexible in the approach, I think has been a strong suit of yours and a strong suit of successful artists in general, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, I've also just never stopped making music. Like through every book I've made, every film, like I've always tried to bring music into it, you know, whether it's like making a soundtrack for a book or using a score from my music for a film. Like I've actually, like, even though I've quote unquote taken a break from music's actually just always been there. So that's the other thing, is like sometimes it's also about just like changing your priorities. You know, like I think in my mind, it's sort of like taking the pressure off music, but still making music because I love it. And that has to be enough too, right? In the conversation of success and career, we also need to create room for like, how do we also continue to do the things we love, even if they're not going to, you know, give us the results we want.
There's been themes of mourning throughout this conversation, of mourning a childhood that you wish could have been more queer and mourning a career that you wish you could have had.
Love the summary.
What do you feel is your relationship to mourning right now? Do you feel like it's going to be something that's lifelong? Is it, what do you know?
I mean, I'm a pretty existential person by nature, so I'm constantly, like right now, actually, like Like the album just came out.
Yeah.
There's like a long form music video that's with it. And like I've been sitting on this project for a year. And so like this weekend I actually feel a bit of mourning because it's it's a really weird thing. It's a nice thing to have it out in the world. But once it's out, it's no longer mine, right? It's no longer, it's not just like in my head. It's in a lot of ways it's yours, and how you listen to it and how you engage with it. And it becomes another one of those things where if I want to go down to the wormhole of like, well, how many people listen to it, I could, but I'm not going to do that. But it's like, mourning is such a strong word, but there is a weird feeling of like, I have to let it go.
Yeah.
You know, it's not mine anymore. And so like, you know, that's my latest relationship with mourning.
Is letting it go.
Just letting it go, letting the record go into the world and hope for the best and feel like I've done everything possible to give it a life, and to also trust that like, I won't know, you know, that like maybe 5 years from now I'll be on a book tour and someone will be like, I have your vinyl for Baby You're Projecting, and that'll be a really nice moment. So
Yeah.
100%. Would you be able to tell folks where they can watch and listen the visual album and any exciting projects you have coming up that people can look out for?
Sure. Yeah. So I have a very comprehensive website. Wow. I really treat my website like an archive, especially because I feel like for queer people and also people of color, our work doesn't get archived. So much gets lost. So vivekshraya.com. You can find all the links to the music. It's on all the streamers, Spotify, Tidal, all that. Yeah. And then the film is also on YouTube. It's called He Loves Me Until He Hates Me. And like I said, it's a long form music video. So that's out. Also on tour a little bit in Canada. So playing Halifax, Calgary, Brampton, Montreal in the next 5 months, 4 months, 3 months.
Exciting. And you can find that all on the website.
On the website. And then, my next big project, I guess, is the show will be out in the fall. So I, you know, as you mentioned, I made this play and we shot the whole thing in January. There's 8 episodes. I wrote every episode. I co-directed one episode. I have music in every episode. I'm in a lot of the episodes, but I also like, it's not just me. There's like 2 other people playing me. So I have like TV childhood Vivek and TV like 20-something Vivek, and so cool. I have a TV mom, I have a TV ex-girlfriend. That's really very cool. Weird. Very wild. Yeah, that'll be, I think, out in the fall.
Thank you so much, Vivek, for joining us on this podcast, talking about your projects, talking about your record and mourning, and a lot of really important topics with us today. If you want to check out more of Vivek's work, make sure to check out their website. It is the first link in the description down below. And until next time, peace.